Tonight, relatives of the Birmingham pub bomb victims vent their anger and frustration at the West Midlands Chief Constable after he tells them he can take the investigation.
We ask him what happened to vital evidence, either lost or destroyed, and should the case be closed. That's at 6.
Coming up, anger as relatives of the Birmingham pub bombing victims are told police could take the investigation no further. That's next.
Catch up with all the latest stories from around the country and around the world in half an hour. After what's happening here at home now, it's Monday's ITV News.
Good evening. Tonight, the police say there'll be no fresh inquiry into the Birmingham pub bombings.
40 years after terrorists killed and maimed almost 200 people, their families are no closer to finding out who did it. You're watching an ITV News Central special.
Hello. There's anger tonight over the news that the police have failed to find any new evidence to prosecute the people who planted the Birmingham pub bombs in 1974. West Midlands Police are denying the case is closed, but the families of the 21 people who died in the atrocity are accusing the force of incompetence and a cover-up.
A team of officers have been reassessing evidence for almost 2 years. But today it emerged that 35 items have gone missing, including an entire unexploded bomb which could have yielded vital clues. Callum Watkinson reports now on the fight to get justice for the 21.
Because listen, I'm not moving till this is sorted.
The day started with a row. The families of those who died in the pub bombings met West Midlands Police looking for answers.
This force has covered up this for 40 years and we're not standing for it anymore.
Instead, they found themselves in an angry confrontation when 2 of their advisors were at first denied access. And after they did get their briefing with the Chief Constable, they emerged even more annoyed. They were told there is no new evidence to prosecute anyone over the bombings, so they remain officially unsolved.
They're not going to reinvestigate. It's all a sham. They treat us like we are just cannon fodder. Our loved ones are meaningless to them. They don't care, they're not interested.
Julie's sister, Maxine Hambleton, was one of 21 people who died in the bombings almost 40 years ago. Her family and the organisation Justice for the 21 had been hoping for a new investigation. That's not going to happen. And they were given some astonishing news. A third Birmingham bomb, which survived intact when it failed to go off, has been lost by West Midlands Police.
Which we have a picture of the contents there, which, they deny.
This is the third bomb that is missing.
This is the third bomb.
A tangible piece of evidence that is missing, that would have had fingerprints on, and this is what was left of it. Oh, and apparently it's been lost since 1991.
We spoke to a retired detective who was present when the detonator of that now missing bomb fired when it was prodded by a colleague with his truncheon. Luckily, there was no explosion. He says with modern technology like DNA profiling, much could have been learned from the remains.
Because we didn't know about DNA then, we didn't know a lot of things then that they know now. It would have been a marvellous clue. It's a sad shame that we didn't know about these things a little earlier.
In all, 35 pieces of crucial evidence are missing. It means the police are no nearer to finding out just who was to blame for the bombs that went off in 2 Birmingham pubs almost 40 years ago. Callum Watkinson, ITV News.
Well, today's decision is another key day in the history of the Birmingham pub bombings. I bet the terrorist atrocity that shocked a city. It was on this busy street 40 years ago that terrorists brought chaos and carnage to the centre of Birmingham. A lot's changed since then. The pubs where people were injured and were killed have long gone, and the city has moved on. But the devastating events 4 decades ago have left a legacy on this city that refuses to go away. On the night of November the 21st, 1974, 3 bombs were planted in Birmingham city centre. At 17 minutes past 8 in the evening, a bomb exploded in a duffel bag in the Mulberry Bush pub in the Rotunda. 10 people were killed. At 27 minutes past 8, 10 minutes later, a second bomb exploded 50 yards away in another pub called the Tavern in the town, killing another 11 people. 182 people were injured. A third bomb on the Hagley Road failed to go off. Within hours of the explosions, 6 Irishmen were arrested. A year later, in 1975, they were sentenced to life in prison. But 16 years later, the men who became known as the Birmingham Six were released after their convictions were quashed.
Well, the news of the loss of the third bomb is deeply embarrassing for West Midlands Police, but they insist the investigation into the pub bombing isn't closed. It's still possible, they say, that significant new information could become available. I've been talking to the Chief Constable of the West Midlands Police about Britain's biggest unsolved crime. Chief Constable, many people of my age in this town remember the Birmingham bombings extremely well, and there is a feeling that this is unfinished business now.
Well, I understand that from West Midlands Police point of view. Of course, the force was only a few months old when these terrible events happened, and I know I can speak for the whole force to say that it's been very much a sort of an open wound since the force was set up, and we would dearly love to be able to bring people to justice for the crime.
How can you do that?
I think it's very difficult after 40 years. We've been, for the past 18 months, carrying out a detailed assessment of all of the material that we've got. So this is not only from the original inquiry, but also from the 1991 re-investigation, taking stock of forensic practices, taking stock of other people who might have further information. But I think we've reached a point that although there's still one or two loose ends to tidy up, one or two other pieces that we can pursue, what I've told the two families this morning is that unless there is significant new information, it is impossible to think that we can restart an investigation that could have a positive outcome.
Now, they've interpreted that as the matter is closed.
Right, I didn't know that. Well, it certainly isn't closed, and the work we've done has put all of the material onto sort of 2014 standards in terms of how it's stored and manageable, so that if we do get new information, we're much, much better placed to analyse it and come to the right conclusions.
But what possible information could come up after 40 years?
Well, I think it has to be information from key individuals, or information from someone who knows those key individuals, who gives us a completely different light on the events of that night. You know, the key issues that I described, none of those are retrospective, so none of those can be applied back. What we have done, we've been working with the Netherlands Institute of Forensic Science, who have carried out a review of all the material that we've got. They've looked at it in terms of the way it's been stored, the continuity, the management, the previous testing. And unfortunately, you know, this is pre-DNA, so material wasn't recovered with an expectation that it would be subject to that sort of testing. So at the moment, there is no information from our forensic material that allows us to move forward.
But there is a suggestion that some of the vital evidence has been lost, and vis-a-vis a bomb, the third bomb, which was up in the Hagley Road, which was intact, and that's apparently been lost.
It's not a suggestion, it's a fact that the trial used 168 exhibits of varying different types. By the time the 1991 investigation, the re-investigation, looked at the exhibits again, 35 of those pieces were no longer there. And that inquiry tracked back to try to find them, but was unsuccessful. We have done the same, looking in places. And my working assumption is that sometime on or around the 10th anniversary of the trial, those objects were disposed of.
That's Chris Sims, the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police. Well, there was further bad news for the families today when the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Hain, said an amnesty should be offered to terrorists who killed and maimed during the Troubles.
We go live now to Westminster and our political correspondent, Carl Dinham. Carl, presumably Peter Hain's proposal would end the prospect of prosecutions for unsolved terrorist murders like the Birmingham pub bombings.
Well, were it to be adopted, it could do, and he's not the only person who's thinking about these kinds of issues. Peter Hain's idea is that the threat of prosecution is preventing people telling the truth about what went on through the Troubles, and therefore preventing 3,000 or so unsolved murders from at least, if not being resulting in prosecutions, at least the victims getting some sort of closure by finding out what actually happened. This is what he said to me when I asked him to explain his ideas a short time ago.
If I were a victim, say, of the Birmingham pub bombings, I'd feel really bitter about it. Of course I would. Loved ones lost in it. And the same goes for the 3,000 other deaths, most of them, many of them not resolved, that happened during those awful, barbarous time of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So I totally understand where the victims are coming from, but my point is there's a fair chance in far too many cases that there will never be a resolution through pursuing conventional means.
And Mr. Hain says that if it's not going to be possible to get a prosecution, then it may be that some victims have to set aside their wish for justice if they're going to at least get somewhere towards the truth. The difficulty, particularly for the Birmingham families, is that this is really only something that can be resolved by the parties to the conflict in Northern Ireland.
Carl, thank you for that report.
Now, as well as the 21 people killed in the Birmingham pub bombings and the 182 people injured, the 6 men originally jailed for the crime also count themselves as victims. They spent 17 years in jail before their convictions were overturned, and then they were set free.
Paddy Hill was one of them. For the first time, he's been to see the cell where he was held during his trial at Lancaster Castle. In this exclusive report, Keith Wilkinson has taken him back to prison.
Almost 40 years on, and Paddy Hill is back at the place where he was a victim of what became known as one of Britain's most notorious miscarriages of justice.
So, Paddy, what memories does this bring to you being right here?
Oh, start of nightmare. Yeah.
On this prison landing, behind the thick walls of the medieval castle fortress at Lancaster, he was held for several weeks during one of the trials of the century, the case of the Birmingham pub bombings.
It also helps from a security point of view that the walls themselves, built in the 12th century, are 10 feet thick and at least 40 feet high.
Here, he and the other 5 men, called the Birmingham Six, were found guilty of 21 murders in what was then Britain's worst terrorist atrocity. And back in one of the cells where he was locked up, one of the things he remembers was the constant sound of the clock tower bells at the nearby church. They remind him of a loss of freedom and the time he was going to have to serve.
Especially at the weekend when the weather's lovely and you're locked up in here. You never forget the church bells.
It was to take almost 17 years before Paddy Hill and his 5 co-defendants won the fight to get their convictions quashed.
Paddy, could you just describe feelings when you came out of that door of the Bailey this afternoon?
I was just glad to get out of it. You know? It was just great to walk out the door without being handcuffed to the screw.
Yet he says here at Lancaster, right from the beginning, many of the prison officers were convinced they were innocent. And according to Paddy, some used to joke and socialise with them during the trial.
So the prison officers here used to come in with 6 bottles of beer every day for us at the Brunette. We used to get one each.
So you used to drink beer here every night during the trial?
That's right, yeah. Supplied free by the prison officers. By the time we come here, the word had spread through the prison service from Winston Green that they knew we were innocent. But everybody was afraid to say anything. You know.
Did some of the prison officers say that they thought you were innocent?
Oh yeah, here, yeah. When the day that we got convicted, when the jury was out that Friday morning, the governor had 6 cars down in the quadrangle for 6 prison officers waiting to take us home. They all actually believed that we were going to be acquitted. And when we got found guilty, when we came back into the prison governor was there to meet us, and honestly, he was in bits. The tears were in his eyes, and he walked up and he hugged every one of us.
Very different to what the men say happened elsewhere. They've always alleged they faced terrible beatings, a claim that's always been denied. They were tried in this courtroom here, close to where they'd been arrested at Heysham, but away from the angry backlash they faced from people in Birmingham back in 1974. The 6 felt safer here, even though the judges in this daunting setting in the past had a terrifying reputation for executing people like witches and Catholics.
Well, there were a number of famous and infamous trials held here. We were the scene of the trials of the Lancashire martyrs, 15 Catholic men who were tried between 1584 and 1646 on charges of high treason. They were all found guilty and they were executed on Golgotha Hill.
So coming back here, you liked this prison compared to others, but it was a nightmare being in prison, losing your freedom.
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare being in prison. It's bad enough when you're guilty, but when you're innocent, it's your worst nightmare come true.
These days, Lancaster Castle Prison is closed, but open in parts to the public for tours. Last time Paddy Hill came here, he was protesting he'd been locked up for something he hadn't done. 4 decades on, he's still demanding to know why. Keith Wilkinson, ITV News.
For almost a quarter of a century, it's been alleged that a number of other men were the real bombers and were never brought to justice. They were even named in 1990 in a television documentary which caused an outcry in the House of Commons.
Chris Mullin, a former MP, claims to know the people who planted the bombs. He believes the police have never wanted to find the actual culprits, having convicted the wrong men. And now, as Stacey Foster reports, he thinks that 40 years on, the police have no chance in the search for the truth.
Freedom for the Birmingham 6 may never have happened without the persistence of this man.
The fact is that the case has clearly collapsed. And
the journalist and former MP, Chris Mullin.
Of the message working
he fought to prove the men were innocent, even though some in the media branded him as an odious loony.
I would like to thank everybody that helped us. Chris Mullin, Sir John Farr, and all the rest of the English people that's helped us over the years. Thank you very much.
It was a big moment for me because it meant, in a very public way, vindication after years of vilification. And since I depended at that time on votes for a living, the vilification was doing me a lot of damage. So it was very good to be vindicated so publicly. But of course it was a bigger event for the 6 men themselves who had not set foot in the outside world for 17 years. And were suddenly propelled out through the front of Bailey, which was lined with crowds and a wall of cameras. And they suddenly found themselves absolutely at the centre of attention in a way that had never happened in their lives and would never happen again. And I think that must have been quite a shock. It certainly, I'm sure, took them some time to adjust. I have my favourite Sun headlines framed on the wall of my study. Loony MP backs bomb gang is the big one. That's a whole front page. Mr. Odious, 20 Things You Didn't Know About Crackpot Chris. I didn't know most of them either.
Controversially, in 1990, Chris Mullin alleged in a book that he had found the real bombers.
Couldn't tell the police where the bombs were planted.
And they were even identified in a Granada TV drama documentary, which also portrayed the Birmingham Six as suspects who'd been beaten up. It sparked this attack by Margaret Thatcher.
We don't either do trial by television, and that the place to put any new evidence is with the police.
I think that the problem is that so many years have elapsed since the bombings, and so there is no realistic possibility, in my view, of securing convictions. I think that's probably the view of the police too, after 40 years. The core of the difficulty is that the West Midlands Police never spent more than about 3 hours looking for the perpetrators of the bombing, once these 6 unfortunate men had fallen into their hands. The only possibility of securing convictions in this case will be if one of the surviving perpetrators, and 2 are dead, were to own up. We're long, long past the stage where any new evidence is likely to be unearthed that will lead to a conviction, except and unless the perpetrators own up, and I don't see any likelihood of that. If they'd spent time looking for the bombers in 1974 and 1975, I think they'd probably have found them, because they all remained in Birmingham. They didn't actually go and catch the only train connecting with the ferry to Ireland that night. They went home, and they remained in Birmingham for some months, possibly longer in some cases. So if they'd been looking, they would have found them, but it is probably, almost certainly, far too late now.
Chris Mullin. Well, we'll have more on today's decision later in the programme, when we'll be joining Steve Clamp, who'll be talking to relatives about what more they can do to bring the killers of their loved ones to justice.
But first, let's cross to Matt Teal in the newsroom with the rest of the day's news.
Sam, thank you. Specialist detectives have started a murder investigation in Derby after a woman's body was found on a service road near houses. Officers say the woman in her 30s was found on Hartington Street in Normanton by a member of the public. She was wearing distinctive camouflage pattern leggings and a black fleece top. Detectives from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit are leading the investigation and are appealing for anyone who saw the woman in the area to come forward. A government report has recommended reducing the speed of HS2 trains to 182 miles an hour, down from 220. MPs on the Environmental Audits Committee say while it would make journeys slightly longer, it would reduce the impacts on the environment. They also warn that building the line could lead to some plant species becoming endangered. Hereford United have been handed a 7-day court adjournment over an unpaid tax bill. The club has already paid some of the £78,000 they owe to Inland Revenue. Supporters have organised a series of fundraisers over the past few days. Comedian Omid Jalili also chipped in, performing 2 sold-out shows which raised £21,000. A football finance expert believes Leicester City's promotion to the Premier League will provide a huge economic boost to the area. These pictures capture the moment their players realised they'd been promoted when rival clubs failed to win on Saturday. Fans have been celebrating too, and it's estimated the win could generate millions of pounds for the local economy and create hundreds of jobs.
There are varying estimates as to what promotion to the Premier League is worth, but 100 million plus, is a figure that's often bandied around, and it could be more than that depending upon their performance next season.
A runner from Solihull came first in the Sheffield Half Marathon, but he won't get his prize money because the race was officially cancelled due to a lack of water. An investigation has been launched into the cancellation, which organisers apologised for. Many of the 5,000 runners decided to continue with members of the public providing them with water.
£500 is a reasonable sum of money, and to not have to get that, and I think it'd be more the fact that you plan to do something and you train for it and then it's taken away from you, so there's nothing you can do. In the back of your mind, you know that really it's not going to count, you're not going to get anything for it, you know, it's not an official sort of result that will go down on paper.
Well, that is all from me. Time now to hand you back to Bob and Sam.
Thank you, Matt. And now back to the story that's dominating the West Midlands today. Almost 40 years on from the Birmingham pub bombings, families of victims have been told by police that they failed to find any new evidence to prosecute the people responsible.
Our correspondent Steve Clamp is at Birmingham Cathedral, where there's a memorial for the 21 who died.
Well, yes, I'm joined by Brian and Julie, who of course lost their sister Maxine, and we heard you earlier and you're very angry, very upset, but what do you do going forward? Is there still a future for your campaign?
There has to be. Justice has to be seen to be done, and the police have decided in their infinite wisdom they don't want to go ahead to do the job they're paid for, so we've got to do it on our own behalves.
And Julie, what is your actual next step? Has this taken the wind out of your sails at all?
No, not at all. In fact, it's made us more determined and more committed. We couldn't be happier to continue along the path that we've taken and will continue to take until our dying breath. If the police aren't prepared to go and investigate and look for the murderers, then we will take every other avenue that is available to us and beyond, and take them and use them to every possible opportunity that we can take. It's really important that somebody fights for the justice of 21 innocent people who were slain cold-bloodedly and who are not here to fight for justice themselves. What is an absolute hypocrisy of our justice system is that the very people who are meant to investigate aren't prepared to do so.
Okay.
So we will.
Certainly a lot of hurt still there for both of you. Let's bring in Canon Janet Chapman. Thank you for talking to us. You've obviously been based here a long time and you've seen what people have gone through. What's the effect been here?
I think this is an open wound in the history of Birmingham, that people are still coming into the cathedral, writing their prayer requests, remember the 1974 victims. And the victims are, of course, the people who were killed and injured, their families, and those who were imprisoned unfairly. The Christian Church stands for justice and truth, and we need to continue to search for this. And there must be people out there who either saw something on the night and didn't realise its significance at the time, or who are living with a guilty secret, and maybe now is the time, this 40th anniversary year, to come forward, to face maybe the horrors of what they have done, and help those who still live with this find out what really happened.
Okay, well, thank you very much for talking to us. This is, of course, the home of the memorial to those 21 who lost their lives so tragically in that horrific incident. And clearly those people who were touched by this still want the one key thing: they want the truth.
Steve Clamp with that report. Well, you've been watching an ITV News Central special on a day when the police said there'll be no fresh inquiry into the Birmingham pub bombings.
Officers say there is no new evidence for a new investigation, but they have admitted 35 items, including an unexploded bomb, have been lost. Almost 200 people were killed or maimed in the atrocity.
Well, tonight, 40 years on, the families say they're no nearer to finding the truth about what happened to their loved ones. It remains Britain's biggest unsolved crime.
And
a short break, whatever the weather. ITV Local Weather, sponsored by Centre Parks.
Hello, good evening. A wonderful carpet of daffodils in Packwood. A big thank you to Des Gardner for sharing the shot. Not quite so spring-like across the region today, was it? But the good news is the conditions are settling down over the next few days. We are expecting a mainly dry story for the week. Cooler and breezier at times as we head into Tuesday, but the good news is we swap low pressure that's been around today, pushing its way north and eastwards, and high pressure will build from the south over the next few days. So mostly dry, perhaps a little bit more cloud by the time you reach Thursday. But for this evening, we are expecting it to be drier and brighter for a time, but further showers will develop from the west and continue to push west to east during the course of tonight. But in between drier and clearer slots, and there the temperatures down to a fairly chilly low of around 3 or 4 Celsius with a continued fresh westerly breeze overnight tonight. An odd shower in the mix tomorrow, but for most of us it's dry, bright and breezy with some sunny spells coming through from time to time. We'll feel a little bit cooler and fresher, 10-11 Celsius, maybe at 13 in the south. But over the next few days it should stay mostly dry. A bit more cloud on Thursday, and by the time we reach Friday it should be drier and brighter, but it will feel chilly with that northwesterly, highs at best 11 or 12 Celsius. Take care.
ITV Local Weather, sponsored by Centre Parks.